She took our son to her affair partner, so I took full custody. I thought we were just getting a divorce, until I saw who she was bringing my son around. Divorce is never easy, but I believed we could handle it like adults, for the sake of our little boy. We weren't yelling or slamming doors, we just grew apart. At least that's what she told me. She said she needed space to find herself, that we were better off as friends. I didn't fight it. I was hurting, sure, but I figured maybe it really was for the best. We agreed on shared custody, alternating weekends, keeping everything civil. I didn't want my son growing up in chaos. I still remember that first weekend she picked him up after we signed the papers. She smiled, said they were going to a park and maybe to get ice cream. Sounded innocent enough, but something didn't sit right with me. Call it instinct, father's intuition, whatever you want. The way she avoided eye contact, the sudden change in her tone when I asked where they were going, and when I offered to help buckle him into the car seat, she told me to just let her do it, like I was intruding. I watched the car pull away, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. That night I couldn't sleep. I opened my phone, looked through some old photos of the three of us back when things were still good. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I checked her social media. She had posted a story, a blurry picture of our son on a couch, next to a man's leg. Not mine. Not any of her friends I recognized. A guy. Adult shoes. Masculine jeans. Casual, like he belonged there. I stared at it, zoomed in. No caption. Just a cozy, quiet night in. And my son was part of it. My blood ran cold. She said she wasn't seeing anyone. She said she needed time alone. And now she was bringing a stranger around my child? The next morning, I asked my son about the visit. He's little, but kids remember more than you think. He told me they went to mommy's friend's house, that they watched cartoons, had pizza, and the man gave him a toy car, a used one with chipped paint. He said the man was funny. I tried to stay calm, nodding along, but inside, something snapped. I had no idea who this guy was. What if he had a record? What if he was unstable? I wasn't going to sit back and let my child be brought into someone else's life like a trophy. I confronted her. Not yelling, not aggressive. I simply asked who the man was. She scoffed, told me it was none of my business, that she had every right to move on, and as long as our son wasn't in danger, I couldn't tell her who she could or couldn't introduce him to. That was her mistake, because the second she said that, I made it my business. I started digging, quietly, methodically. I wasn't about to lose my son to someone I couldn't trust. I talked to a friend of mine who works in background checks. All I gave him was a name. I had overheard it once when our son was talking to his toys. Kids talk more than they know. What I got back made my stomach twist. The man had been arrested twice. Once for domestic disturbance, once for DUI. Both charges dropped, but still. He was reckless, unstable, and she was bringing our child into his home. I documented everything. Dates, times, social media posts, my son's comments. I even started recording our custody handoffs with my dashcam, just in case. But the real turning point came when my son came home with a bruise on his arm. It wasn't big, just a purple mark, like someone had grabbed him too hard. He said it happened when they were playing and he fell. But when I asked what the man did, he went quiet. I knew then, this wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about protection. I booked an appointment with a lawyer the next day, and that's when the real war began. I walked into the lawyer's office with a folder stuffed full of evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, photos, even transcriptions of things my son had said. I wasn't just some bitter ex-husband trying to make trouble. I was a father fighting to keep his child safe, and I needed someone who would see that. Thankfully, my lawyer did. She listened carefully, flipping through the papers, nodding slowly. When I mentioned the background report on the man my ex had been seeing, her eyes narrowed. "This is enough to petition for a custody modification," she said. "Especially if we can prove your son is being put in harm's way." That phrase stuck with me. Put in harm's way. It sounded so sterile, so clinical. But in my heart, I knew it meant something far more terrifying. Because my son, The one thing in this world I truly lived for was spending time with someone who had no business being around children. And my ex-wife? She either didn't care or was too blind to see the danger. I wasn't going to wait for something worse to happen. I began documenting every detail with military precision. I kept track of every visit, every comment my son made, and every bruise or scratch that showed up when he came back from her place. I bought a small voice recorder and taught my son how to use it. Nothing intrusive. I just told him it was for a fun game. Something to help us remember the things he did when he wasn't with me. I knew I was walking a fine legal line, but I also knew the system didn't move fast unless it had a reason. And I wasn't going to let red tape stop me. 2 weeks after our initial meeting, my lawyer filed the motion. Temporary full custody, pending investigation. I remember the way my ex looked when she got served the papers. Confused at first, then angry. She called me, yelling through the phone, accusing me of trying to steal her child. I didn't yell back. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply told her the truth. You brought a dangerous man around our son. I won't let that slide. She hung up on me. That same day, I got a message from the guy, her new boyfriend. Some tough guy nonsense about how I needed to back off and stop causing drama. I didn't respond. I just sent the screenshot to my lawyer. The court date came fast. Faster than I expected, honestly. Maybe the judge saw what we saw, the risk, the recklessness, the total disregard for safety. I stood there in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore, hands clenched at my sides, trying to keep my emotions in check. My ex sat across from me with her arms folded, all cold stares and eye rolls. She tried to spin it, claimed the man was a family friend, that my son adored him, that I was just jealous and bitter. But when the lawyer presented the arrest record, the photos, the recordings, and the bruises, the courtroom went silent. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited for the judge's response. He didn't shout. He didn't lecture. He just looked over his glasses and said, "Until further notice, full physical custody is awarded to the father. Visitation by the mother will be supervised and reevaluated pending investigation results." I should have felt victorious, but I didn't. I felt broken, because this wasn't just about winning a case. This was about what had been lost. Trust, family, safety. My son came home with me that day. I'll never forget the way he hugged me when we walked through the door, like he finally felt safe again. But I knew it wasn't over. My ex wasn't the type to go quietly, and her boyfriend wasn't either. That night I found my car keyed, deep scratches down the side like angry claws. I didn't react. I didn't retaliate. I called the police, filed a report, and added it to the growing stack of evidence. My lawyer called it harassment. I called it proof. Proof that I was doing the right thing, that I had to stay one step ahead. My son was sleeping peacefully upstairs while I stood outside, staring at the damage. I knew this was just the beginning. She had already lost partial custody. If I kept going, if I stayed smart, she might lose everything. But I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it for him, because someday he'd grow up and ask questions. And I wanted to be able to look him in the eye and say, "I did everything I could to protect you," even if it meant becoming the enemy in someone else's story. The weeks that followed were some of the most stressful of my life. On the surface, things seemed to calm down. My ex had gone silent. No more phone calls. No more angry texts. No more surprise drop-ins. But that silence wasn't peace. It was a warning. I could feel it in my gut. She wasn't done. Not even close. Every time I dropped my son off at the court-mandated supervised visits, she'd plaster on this fake smile like she was the perfect mother just biding her time. I'd see the way she looked at me, like she was planning something behind those eyes, something calculated. And I wasn't wrong. A few days after another one of those awkward handoffs, I received an envelope. Not through the mail. It was hand-delivered. Inside was a petition she was filing to reverse the custody order, claiming I was manipulating our son, turning him against her, and, get this, emotionally abusive. She even had a statement from a so-called family therapist she'd hired, someone who had never even spoken to me. I read through the pages in disbelief. It was like she was writing a script for a drama she was starring in, casting herself as the victim and me as the villain. But I had the truth on my side. I just needed to prove it. I met with my lawyer again that afternoon. We went over every piece of evidence we had, carefully matching her new claims with documented proof that she was twisting reality. My lawyer warned me that family court doesn't always operate on logic or fairness. It's about perception, emotional stability, the best interest of the child. And sometimes, if the other side plays dirty enough, truth gets buried under noise. So we doubled down. We gathered statements from teachers, from the daycare, even from my neighbors who had seen me with my son. Every bit of normalcy, every routine interaction, they all mattered now. Because I wasn't just defending my right as a father. I was defending my integrity. But while we were building our case, something unexpected happened. My son started to talk more. Not just about toys or cartoons, but about the man again. He said things that chilled me. He mentioned how the man got angry when Mommy didn't listen. How he'd slam doors and yell words my son wasn't supposed to repeat. One night, he whispered to me while I was tucking him in, "Daddy, I don't like it when he's there. He scares me." I hugged him tighter than I ever had before. That was it. That was the line. I couldn't just react through the courts anymore. I needed more. Proof that couldn't be denied. So I hired a private investigator. It wasn't cheap, but I knew it was necessary. The guy was discreet, experienced, and he got to work immediately. He followed her, documented every time she left our son alone with the boyfriend despite court orders. Every instance where the man was seen entering or exiting her home during her supervised hours. Within 10 days, I had photos, videos, and a timeline of violations. One video in particular hit me like a freight train. It showed my son being dropped off at her place for a supervised visit, except the court-assigned supervisor never showed up. But the boyfriend did. He was already there, opening the door, pulling my son inside like he belonged there. That footage wasn't just disturbing, it was damning. I brought it all to my lawyer. We filed for an emergency hearing. The court date was scheduled within the week. My ex must have gotten wind of what was coming, because she suddenly tried to reach out. She sent a message, short and desperate. "Can we talk before court? Please." I ignored it. She had her chance to talk when this was just about trust. Now it was about safety. At the emergency hearing, we laid everything out. Videos, timestamps, prior violations, recordings of my son expressing fear. I could see the judge's expression change with every new piece of evidence. This wasn't a messy divorce anymore. This was a pattern of deception and negligence. My ex tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the man wasn't alone with our son, that the videos were taken out of context. But the footage didn't lie. Neither did the fear in my son's voice. The judge didn't hesitate this time. Full legal and physical custody was granted to me indefinitely. Her visitation rights were suspended, pending a psychological evaluation and a complete review of her household. My ex broke down in court, sobbing into her hands like she was the one who had been betrayed. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vengeance. All I felt was relief. I looked over at my son, who was sitting quietly with a court advocate in the corner of the room. He looked small, tired, but safe. That's all I had ever wanted. The next few days were quieter. My son and I spent time just being together, building Lego towers, making pancakes, watching his favorite shows. He didn't ask about his mom. He just seemed lighter, like the weight of something he couldn't explain had been lifted. But I knew better than to let my guard down. My ex wasn't the type to walk away. And even though I had won this round, the war was far from over. She had lost custody. She had lost her credibility. And in her eyes, she had lost control. That's when people become dangerous. I could feel the storm building behind her silence. But I wasn't afraid. I had come too far, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to back down now. I would protect my son with everything I had, even if it meant burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. Life after the emergency hearing settled into a new kind of normal, but beneath the surface, I remained on edge. I had full custody of my son now, but that didn't mean we were safe. Not completely. I knew her well enough to know that she wouldn't give up easily. Not after being exposed, not after losing control. And I was right. Less than 2 weeks after the hearing, strange things started happening. It began with anonymous calls in the middle of the night. I'd answer, and there'd be silence on the other end. Sometimes, I could hear faint breathing before the line went dead. Then came the letters. No return address, just folded sheets of paper with scribbled threats, blaming me for tearing a mother away from her child, and promising that justice would be served. At first, I tried to ignore them, assuming it was just her way of lashing out. But when my son's school called and told me a woman had come by asking about his class schedule, someone who wasn't on the approved list, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I reported everything to the police and gave them the letters. They opened an investigation, but like most things involving custody disputes, they approached it cautiously, treating it as a domestic matter. I was told to keep documenting everything and stay vigilant, as if I wasn't already sleeping with one eye open. I installed security cameras around the house, changed the locks, updated all of my son's school pickup protocols, and informed his teachers to contact me immediately if anything seemed off. I wasn't going to take any chances. My son had already been through enough. But despite the fear and stress, our bond only grew stronger. We fell into routines, early breakfasts, bedtime stories, weekend projects. He laughed more. He slept better. I started seeing glimpses of the carefree child he used to be, and that was the only thing that kept me grounded. Still, I couldn't relax entirely, because behind every good day, there was the looming shadow of what she might do next. My ex was silent on the surface, but I knew she was building something in the background. It wasn't just about custody for her anymore. It was about revenge. She needed someone to blame for her downfall, and I was the perfect target. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter from her attorney. It wasn't a custody appeal. It was a lawsuit. She was suing me for defamation, claiming I had spread false information about her to damage her reputation and prevent her from gaining employment. She was demanding damages, legal fees, and even custody reconsideration based on what she called ongoing emotional trauma. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the words over and over, my hands shaking with disbelief. This wasn't just personal anymore. She wanted to ruin me, financially, emotionally, publicly. And for the first time since this all began, I felt genuinely exhausted. Not defeated, but tired in a way that reached into my bones. I called my lawyer, who was equally stunned by the move. "This isn't about the child anymore," she said. "She's trying to flip the narrative, make herself the victim." We got to work immediately, preparing a counter-response. It wasn't difficult. Between the court records, the investigation, and the private investigator's documentation, we had a mountain of evidence showing her pattern of deception and instability. But I couldn't help wondering how far she was willing to go. What else was she willing to do? One night, after putting my son to bed, I sat outside on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. I thought about how different my life had become. A year ago, I was just a husband and a father trying to hold a family together. Now I was a single dad, locked in a legal war with someone I had once promised to love and protect. The transformation had been slow, almost imperceptible, but I could feel it in myself. I had become colder, more calculated. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. When someone threatens your child, when they put their selfish desires above your child's safety, something in you changes. You stop caring about being the nice guy. You start doing whatever it takes. I knew that winning the lawsuit wouldn't be the end. Even if I crushed her in court, even if I proved to everyone that she was lying, it wouldn't stop her from trying again. She had become consumed by a version of reality where I was the villain and she was the wounded mother clawing her way back. And in her mind, that story had to end with her getting our son back, no matter what the cost. But I wasn't about to let that happen. Not while I was still breathing. Not after everything we had already survived. I started working with a child psychologist to help my son process everything he had gone through. Quietly, gently. I didn't want him to grow up afraid of his own story. I wanted him to feel safe enough to tell it someday. And as for me, I kept showing up. Every day. Making lunches. Reading books. Driving him to school. Because consistency is what keeps kids grounded. And love, real love, is in the showing up. Not the drama, not the courtroom speeches, just the quiet, steady presence of someone who refuses to let go. But deep down, I knew something else was coming, something bigger. I could feel it like the distant rumble of a storm just beyond the horizon. She had tried everything: manipulation, threats, lawsuits, and she had failed, which meant the next move would be the most desperate one yet. I didn't know when it would come or what form it would take. But I was ready. I had to be, because this wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a battle for my son's future, and I was ready to fight until the end. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when everything feels heavy and gray. I was picking my son up from school, umbrella in one hand, his small backpack in the other. He ran toward me like he always did, arms wide, calling out, "Dad!" in that innocent, joyful voice that somehow made everything I was fighting for feel worth it. We were halfway across the parking lot when I noticed her car, parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted. I recognized it immediately, her boyfriend's car. I pulled my son close and walked faster, my instincts kicking in. I didn't say anything to him, just got us into the car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. That night, I checked the camera feeds. Sure enough, there it was, his car slowly rolling past our driveway, headlights dimmed, like he was trying to blend in. I called the police and gave them the footage. They opened a file again, took my statement again. But still, they said it wasn't enough to press charges. No direct threat, they told me. No confrontation. Just like before, I was expected to wait until something worse happened before anyone would take it seriously. But I didn't wait. I called my lawyer and told her everything. She helped me file for a restraining order, not just against her boyfriend, but against her as well. The visits were already suspended, but now I wanted a permanent injunction. No contact, no proximity, no chance of them getting near my son again. And this time I had a stronger case than ever. I included every incident: the calls, the letters, the school visit, the lawsuit, and now the stalking. It was a thick file, filled with dates, times, images, recordings, and written statements. My lawyer said it was more than enough. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled within 10 days. But before that could even happen, she made her final move. I was at home, just finished putting my son to bed, when there was a loud knock at the door. Not frantic, firm. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers. For a second, I thought maybe they were following up on my report. I opened the door. What I wasn't expecting was to be told that my ex had accused me of child neglect, and they were there to conduct a wellness check. I stood frozen for a second, completely stunned. "She said what?" I asked. The officers repeated themselves, calm but firm. Apparently, she had called Child Protective Services and claimed I left my son alone for hours, that I was emotionally unstable, and that he often cried and begged to see her, but I refused. It was a desperate, last-ditch lie, and I knew it. But the worst part? They had to take it seriously. One officer stayed with me while the other spoke to my son in his room. I could hear them asking him if he felt safe, if he ever got left alone, if he missed his mom. My son, bless his heart, answered truthfully and clearly. "My dad is always here. He makes my dinner. He reads to me. I don't want to go with mommy. I like it here." The officers apologized before they left. They said everything seemed fine, that my son looked healthy and happy. But the damage was already done. Not to my record, thankfully, but to my peace of mind. She had tried to weaponize the system against me, hoping to get just enough of a mark on my file to claw her way back into the picture. That was the moment I realized she would never stop. Not on her own. Not willingly. So I escalated. At the next court appearance, we submitted a new petition, not just for a restraining order, but to terminate all of her parental rights. It's not something I ever imagined I'd have to do. I didn't go into fatherhood thinking I'd someday need to erase one of my son's parents from his legal life. But this wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what he needed. Stability, safety, peace. The evidence was overwhelming. The false CPS report, the unauthorized school visit, the boyfriend's criminal history, the defiance of court orders. It all painted a picture of a parent who was no longer capable of putting her child's needs before her own obsession. The court deliberated for weeks. Every day felt like walking on a wire, waiting to see if we'd fall or finally reach the other side. When the ruling finally came down, I sat in the same courtroom where it had all started, knees bouncing, hands cold. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately, reading through the decision point by point. And then came the words I had both feared and longed for. Parental rights of the respondent are hereby terminated. Sole legal and physical custody will remain with the petitioner. All future contact is prohibited. She wasn't there. She didn't even show up. When I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. There was no victory lap. No joy. Just silence. Heavy, final silence. But my son was waiting at home. And when I walked through the door, he ran up and hugged me just like he always did. Except this time, the hug felt different. Felt like closure. Today, life is quieter. My son is thriving in school. He's laughing again. We're building something solid, something real. I still carry the scars of what we went through, but they've turned into something stronger, armor. And every time someone asks how I managed to stay so calm, how I didn't give up, I just tell them this. When you're a parent, giving up isn't an option. You fight, you show up, you protect what matters. And if you've made it this far in our story, I want to thank you. It means the world to know our voices were heard. Please consider subscribing for more real stories, and leave a comment if this one moved you. You're not alone. There's always someone out there fighting quietly, just like we did.